"Be prepared" served as the Boy Scouts' motto. The Scouts' code differed, emphasizing qualities such as trustworthiness, loyalty, helpfulness, friendliness, courtesy, kindness, obedience, cheerfulness, thriftiness, bravery, cleanliness, and reverence, along with seemingly contradictory traits of naivety, stupidity, idiocy, and trust. Surprisingly, these aspects coexisted seamlessly. Nick had no other answers. Typically, he refrained from inspecting anything on his wife's iPhone, a practice she acknowledged. Consequently, she neglected extra security measures. Being a Boy Scout, Nick upheld honesty and avoided invading privacy. However, with his wife heading out of town soon, he sought her hotel's name, aiming to avert a potential disagreement arising from his forgetfulness, a recurring issue lately. Post their wedding 5 years ago, this impending trip marked their lengthiest separation. Nick contemplated a romantic gesture, like sending flowers, to express his love while she was in the romantic city of Paris. Yet, his plans were disrupted by the realization that Dwayne, not he, was the one she would be sharing this experience with. Entering his wife's phone code, their wedding date, Nick found himself perusing work-safe emails exchanged between Linda and Dwayne. Their discussions included a nighttime stroll down the Champs-Élysées and then a moonlit boat ride on the Seine. Almost as surprising as the affair itself was the fact that Nick's wife, Linda, and her lover, Dwayne, exchanged messages using their work email accounts. She should have known better. So should Dwayne. Like Nick, Linda was a lawyer. Dwayne worked as a paralegal at Linda's firm. All three, Nick, Linda, and Dwayne, had experienced enough document handling and major litigation. Huge teams of lawyers and paralegals read each of the hundreds of thousands of emails received or considered as part of document discovery. There was always a story about an affair by one or two idiots, and then the lawyers would try to figure out if the affair was relevant, and if so, how to limit damages. Nick didn't really pay attention to what Linda had told him about the trip and the name of the hotel where the team would be staying, because something funny was going on at that moment. Nick didn't know what it was, but instinct made his hair stand on end. 5 years as a lawyer listening to clients lie, and listening to lawyers carefully avoid lying by not telling everything, had made his listening skills sharp. And something was wrong when Linda initially told him about the trip, a very boring arbitration case that would keep them so busy they wouldn't even be able to enjoy the sights. She said it without looking at him at all, and a little too flippantly. She knew Paris was one of Nick's favorite cities, and they always talked about going together because Linda had never been there. Nick discovered her response to be peculiar, but the worst-case scenario had not even crossed his mind. Yet, the content of the email he was presently reading seemed like a direct stab into his heart. Dwayne had suggested the idea of letting go of the Boy Scout for them to spend more time together without worry. Linda expressed that she felt safe with him. Nick questioned her about deceiving him behind the Boy Scout's back, making him excited. Uncertain about what to do, Nick decided to print the email on the Wi-Fi printer in the basement, just in case. As a seasoned lawyer, his initial task was to preserve the evidence by printing the letter and placing it in his computer bag. Nick took a moment to think. He was certain about what he wanted to do. In his view, he had a win-win option: feign readiness to kiss her, then abruptly collide with a tree in the woods behind the house. Dwayne, on the other hand, would face less mercy before causing damage. Nick needed to think, and thinking was what defined him as a lawyer. He was paid to utilize his brain, not his muscles, and he had to think quickly because Linda had gone for a run and would return soon. Before he could delve into his thoughts, he had to complete his assignment and find a hotel, not to send flowers. He wasn't sure why he needed that information, but he sensed a purpose. La Clef Tourfell, near the Trocadero, across the river from the Eiffel Tower, a 5-minute walk from the International Chamber of Commerce, where Linda and Dwayne would be working on their arbitration case with the rest of the team. During the lovers' free time between hotel rendezvous, he had to conduct a quick computer search on Virginia's divorce laws, drawing from his bar exam days 5 years ago. It was always good to check. Infidelity was grounds for divorce, and could impact matters like alimony and property division. However, there were objections to the charge of infidelity, one being convenience. The defense was to discover the infidelity and then willingly resume coital relations and continue living together. Hence, he needed to leave the house promptly. Confrontation? Not yet. His plan was to unleash total shock and awe on her. With no uncertainties, he aimed to dominate the battlefield to end this marriage, even if it meant lying. It conflicted with Scout law, but this was war. After all, Churchill stated, "In war, truth is so valuable that it must always be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies." Nick's lies now served a more critical purpose. None of them were under oath anyway. He went up to the bedroom, swiftly packed, and placed the suitcases by the front door. Just as he gathered the necessary paperwork, bank and credit card statements, 401k and IRA accounts, car papers, paycheck statements, mortgage statements, and Linda's latest student loan balance, she returned from her run, and he heard her in the kitchen as he ascended from his basement office. Upon observing her drinking Gatorade, he decided to feign concern, appearing out of place. Despite her looking good with shoulder-length brown hair and a ponytail, he came to the realization that love was dead. He conveyed the news of going to Paris with a grim smile. Linda's face lost its color, and her blue eyes paled. In response to his announcement, she quickly regained composure, asking if it was Paris, Virginia. Nick explained that Sven had called, informing them about testifying in his insurance case and the need to prepare a witness. He mentioned the complications arising from losing a motion to compel, causing chaos in the court schedule. Nick anticipated being on the road for a few weeks, with the possibility of stopping by to do laundry from time to time. Linda, adopting a suitably concerned expression, remarked sympathetically, suggesting that maybe his firm was recruiting. Nick expressed a preference for her version of Paris. Linda, noticing worry returning to his face, then smirked, teasing him to send her a resume, hinting at the possibility of considering him for a job. It was a playful jab, considering Linda's law school ranked higher academically than Nick's. Perhaps feeling guilty, she gestured as if about to hug him, but Nick turned and headed down to his office before she could close the gap. The visions of him punching her in the face resurfaced, and he wasn't sure he could keep them under control. Rising, Linda inquired about his dinner preferences. He informed her that he couldn't stay and would grab something on the road, mentioning Sven's excitement and eagerness for him to hit the road immediately. He spoke while walking through the kitchen, and Linda followed him to the door, appearing a bit worried as he took the suitcases and headed for the exit. For a goodbye kiss, she pressed her lips together, expressing regret that she might have a cold, citing a sore throat in the afternoon. Linda followed him to the car as he loaded it up. He answered her question about his return, stating that it probably wouldn't be until Friday at the earliest. After Paris, they were heading to Roanoke, and the following week, they had to go to Baltimore. Noticing a change in Linda's demeanor, he thought she might be growing more paranoid. He observed her staring off into the distance, as if calculating the unexpected possibilities his absence would open up. He waved goodbye and drove away from the driveway, hoping she'd assume he was busy with work and annoyed at being called in on a Saturday. His acting skills weren't capable of much more than that right now, but he suspected she was already planning to ask Dwayne out. Nick drove until he reached the nearest shopping center with a coffee shop. Like most lawyers, he thought better on paper. Sipping his coffee, he began making a list of cases. He paused for a moment to realize that he had never once thought about reconciliation. It wasn't even an option. Retribution would be inevitable. The only question was the degree. He was interrupted by the phone ringing, and upon not recognizing the number, he impatiently answered. The caller introduced himself as Sam Granger, explaining that he obtained the number from old real estate records. Granger quickly got to the point, stating that he was in the business of buying old houses to tear them down and build McMansions. He acknowledged the general disapproval of his work, but noted that people tended to dislike him less when presented with a check. Nick didn't have much time to react, only thinking about how the house wasn't old but cozy. He wondered why Granger was talking about tearing it down. However, his rational mind took over. Granger expressed his interest in buying Nick's house to tear it down, mentioning that he couldn't guarantee the timing of new construction, especially with county permits. He clarified that his profits came from renting out the new properties quickly. Despite Nick's initial surprise and confusion, he could hardly contain a Grinch-like smile at the prospect of a potentially good offer, especially if he and his wife were motivated to sell. Linda had picked out a house shortly before their wedding. It was an old ranch house, but with a nice yard that looked right out onto a patch of woods with a creek running through it. It was close to major highways, but was quite secluded and peaceful. What finally won her over was the treehouse in the yard across from the bedroom window. She appreciated that the house was suitable for children. Nick, on the other hand, liked the price and the convenient location, being only 20 minutes from a major metro parking lot. The prospect of a 30-minute train ride to work seemed like a reasonable option for the neighborhood. Nick addressed Mr. Granger, expressing that he would be occupied with work for the next few days, making it challenging to ensure access to the property. Granger insisted on being called Sam and reassured Nick that he didn't need to see the inside, emphasizing that it was a demolition job and he had already assessed it from the outside. Nick agreed to meet on Sunday morning, informing Sam that he would likely handle the deal closing himself by executing a power of attorney for his busy wife. Sam had no issue with this arrangement and offered to provide the necessary form. Nick noted the address and began outlining a plan. Reflecting on Linda's reliance on her Boy Scout, he pondered the irony that Lord Baden-Powell, the founder of the boys' movement, had drawn inspiration from military scouts, emphasizing skills such as stealth, cunning, and self-reliance. Considering an ambush strategy, he knocked over his empty coffee cup and went to his car for privacy. Nick dialed a number on his cell phone and then another, addressing the person who answered as Frank. He urgently requested a favor, needing it immediately. Frank Barry was a private investigator during his 5 years as a corporate lawyer. Nick made it a habit to assist poor people with their legal problems pro bono. This aligned with his ideas of public service. Additionally, he received a per-hour fee from his firm for doing so, and real courtroom experience, something his day job usually didn't provide. One of his law school classmates recommended Frank to assist with a nasty divorce case in which a stepfather was coitally abusing his stepdaughter. Frank's evidence allowed him to apprehend a boyfriend when the sluggish police response failed, and thanks to that evidence, the divorce case was resolved promptly. Frank listened attentively as Nick explained what he had learned. He inquired if Nick believed his wife would invite the other person into her bed that night and commented on her perceived brazenness and arrogance, highlighting her academic achievements. Frank expressed his determination to handle the situation himself and conveyed gratitude to Nick, mentioning the positive publicity the Rivera divorce case had brought him. Nick acknowledged Frank's words, expressing appreciation. He then informed Frank about a house in the backyard that might be useful for his purposes. Nick described how it opened right into the bedroom, where Linda liked to practice martial arts with the curtains open. He shared that there was a way to access it by going through the woods and jumping over the creek after dark with no fences or dogs. Nick provided details about a service road on the other side where one could park. Expressing his thanks, Nick suggested placing a camera outside aimed at the front of the house to monitor the comings and goings. Nick and Frank discussed using Harry for a divorce, with Nick confirming that he indeed wanted a divorce. Frank acknowledged Nick's decision and mentioned being familiar with how Harry preferred to have the affidavit and report done. He expressed confidence that they would find out the truth soon. After the conversation with Frank, Nick reached out to Harry. Harry initially thought it was about the law school reunion, but quickly realized it was something else. Nick clarified that he wanted to hire Harry because Linda was cheating, and he wanted to take legal action. After bringing Harry up to speed on the situation, Harry suggested that Nick come back the next day. Despite it being Sunday, Harry had some paperwork to deal with at the office and planned to stop by. He proposed starting the process and acknowledged that Nick seemed to have already addressed the issue of avoiding infidelity. Nick informed Frank that Harry was dealing with clear and convincing evidence, highlighting the challenge of the financial settlement, as Linda, being a lawyer at a large firm, had the resources to prolong the case with the support of her colleagues. Despite this, Nick assured Frank that he would handle the situation and believed they could settle it amicably. In the next conversation, Nick spoke with Harry, expressing the intention to settle the matter civilly rather than seeking vengeance. Harry acknowledged Nick's approach and agreed to see what he could come up with. Nick's final call was to Maggie, and the initial silence was palpable. Nick explained that he needed her help regarding Linda's infidelity. He apologized for past mistakes, acknowledging their affair and letting Linda cut Maggie out of his life. Despite Nick's emotional plea, he left Maggie to process his request. Eventually, she agreed to help, expressing gratitude for Nick's ability to make her laugh. She even teased him about meeting her new partner and proposed a dinner date when the dust settled. He needed somewhere to hide out for a while and make a plan of action. So, he found an extended stay hotel outside the Beltway in Fairfax, far enough away from the usual places he and Linda frequented that he wouldn't be spotted, settled in, and went to get some food. He wasn't particularly hungry, but he knew he needed something in his stomach to digest the drinks he was about to drink. The restaurant, called El Mariachi, was across the street from the hotel. It would be enough because the free Joels and cheese would just make him sick. As the hostess sat him down in a booth, he saw the bartender looking at him. He seemed vaguely familiar, but Nick put the thought out of his mind. He had enough to worry about at the moment. To see pupusas on the menu meant that the restaurant was a Central American establishment pretending to be Mexican. Most Americans didn't know the difference. Along with his meal, he ordered some cheap tequila. He knew the next day's hangover would be brutal, but he considered the pain part of the rite of passage. The waitress returned with a bottle of excellent top-shelf tequila and a highball glass. When Nick looked up at the waitress, she merely pointed to the bartender, who saluted him. Nick accepted the greeting and poured himself a generous portion as the bartender went back to serving other customers. It took a moment, but Nick remembered who he was. He remembered that the bartender was one of the people who had attended Rivera's divorce hearings and the criminal trials Nick had attended. He always sat in the last row by himself. No one ever sat next to him. Once his client, Sonia's daughter, hugged him. But when Nick asked Sonia who it was, she remained silent and said he was just a family friend. Nick ate in silence, making notes in his notebook and drinking tequila. When the waitress cleared away the dirty plates, he went to the break room. He felt like everything around him was moving, like on a ship. When he walked, he needed to lean against the wall while he went about his business. Then he went back to the booth, trying to keep steady, and found the bartender sitting in his booth on the opposite bench. The person addressed as Senor Nick warmly greeted him, expressing gratitude for Nick's assistance in helping his cousin end a problematic marriage. Nick attempted to downplay his role, but the bartender persisted, sharing that the cousin's ex-husband had suffered severe smackings in prison, resulting in the belief that he might never walk or eat solid food again. The bartender disclosed this information with a slight smile, and Nick, feeling a chill, remarked that he hadn't heard about it. The bartender casually dismissed it as yesterday's news. Nick, sitting down, tried to shift the focus and asked about the bartender's curiosity regarding his presence alone at El Mariachi's on a Saturday night. The bartender inquired about Nick's wife, describing her as beautiful. Nick locked eyes with the bartender, who maintained a smile. It wasn't mocking, but rather knowing. Nick couldn't fathom why the man posed such a peculiar question. How did the bartender even discern Nick's marital status? Then, Nick recalled Linda surprising him at a hearing and kissing him. The bartender must have lingered in the courtroom afterward. "We had some problems with her," Nick admitted. He saw no reason to deceive or withhold information, such as her involvement with someone else. The familiar smile reappeared, rendering Nick momentarily speechless. The bartender pointed out that keeping secrets involved not writing them down and leaving the paper in plain sight, gesturing towards Nick's notebook, which contained elements related to infidelity, a sketch of Dwayne with a knife, Linda's name circled with a slash, and a to-do list mentioning "burn that pig." Nick acknowledged the lapse in operational security, but noted that he hadn't disclosed any client secrets. The bartender advised Nick to consider what he truly desired aside from money and suggested revenge as an option. Nick didn't hesitate, expressing a violent desire to physically damage Linda. The bartender's smile widened, and he chuckled, cautioning Nick about the legal consequences of such retaliation. He emphasized that people who act violently often end up in jail, a situation Nick would likely want to avoid unless visiting clients. Acknowledging Nick's irrational thoughts, the bartender sympathetically suggested that he might be of assistance. He referenced Nick's past help to his cousin, acknowledging that she could have asked him for help, but for various reasons, she refused. Nick stepped in and resolved her issue, earning the bartender's gratitude. Nick tried to interject. Sure, he had Frank gather the evidence, but he had the police handle the investigation. It didn't hurt that Nick asked one of the partners in his firm, a former assistant United States attorney from the area, to have a quiet chat with the Commonwealth's attorney to ensure the criminal case was handled properly. Nick accompanied his client just to guarantee the prosecutors treated her with the respect she deserved. The bartender dismissed Nick's protests, expressing gratitude for his assistance to forgotten people like his cousin. He emphasized being indebted to Nick on behalf of his family and offered to repay his debts by providing assistance. Nick, unsure of the bartender's identity, asked for his name, and the bartender revealed that some people referred to him as El Diablo, or the Devil, though friends called him Jose Garcia. Nick jokingly asked if he had to sell his soul to get a favor, and El Diablo responded with a smile, calling it professional courtesy, and playfully noting that lawyers have no souls. El Diablo then requested Nick's address, his wife's name, and details about her daily routine. In response, Nick inquired about El Diablo's plan, suggesting that he stay blissfully ignorant and report on his movements over the next few months. He advised El Diablo to get a cell phone for communication, leave a number at the bar, and refrain from returning to El Mariachi's for the best outcome. Nick shared details with El Diablo about hiring a private investigator, his plan to remain at home until Linda's departure for France, and provided information about Linda's travel plans. El Diablo, aware of the Paris hotel location without disclosing how he knew, posed a question to Nick. He inquired about the possibility of reconciliation, forgiveness, or mercy, emphasizing the importance of resolving any doubts. The smile on El Diablo's face gave way to a serious expression as he awaited Nick's response. Nick, maintaining eye contact, took a deep breath and expressed his simple values of trust and loyalty. He admitted that his marriage lacked these values, with Linda triggering a transformation in his feelings from love to hate. Although he expected indifference to develop with time, that moment had not yet arrived. El Diablo, after hearing Nick's sentiments, reassured him that there was no chance for reconciliation. He concluded the conversation by telling Nick not to worry about a thing. The waitress brought the bill, and El Diablo dismissed her, letting Nick tip generously. He also allowed Nick to take a bottle of tequila, but advised him to take his time, needing sharpness for the upcoming battle. Surprisingly, waking up without much of a hangover on Sunday morning, Nick arrived at Harry's law office at 10 a.m., where he found Frank already present. Apologizing, Frank informed Nick that Linda was engaging in lovemaking activities with another man in his bed. Despite receiving a video copy, Nick was cautioned by Harry against watching it. Harry intervened, advising Nick against any reckless actions. Nick, assuring Harry, mentioned that he followed Harry's earlier suggestion to climb into the treehouse, obtaining clear shots of their faces and evidence of their physical interactions. He described the situation as merely a physical phenomenon, with the two hardly engaging in conversation, just having fun like rabbits. Nick wasn't sure if this revelation would alter their plans. Harry, responding negatively, inquired about the details. Nick spared him the specifics, but mentioned the high stamina of both individuals involved. Harry expressed his gratitude, albeit with a tinge of regret. Nick, in turn, apologized for sharing the information. Harry proceeded to reveal that Linda personally attended Nick's party last year, and they identified the man involved as Dwayne Martin, a colleague of hers. Although they couldn't determine the duration of their affair, they had clear and convincing evidence, including camera footage of their comings and goings. Harry assured Nick that he would email a link to the live feed on their secure server and mentioned that he would draft a report and supporting affidavit. Harry apologized once again, acknowledging Nick as a friend. After shaking hands with Harry and Nick, Frank left the office. Harry then inquired about Nick's plans, and Nick expressed the intention to file for divorce based on grounds of infidelity without directly filing against Linda. Harry looked at Nick without displaying any particular emotion. Nick assured Harry that he didn't want him to do anything reckless and believed the process would go more smoothly than expected. Harry grimaced at the suggestion. Nick continued, advising Harry to file the divorce case on Monday afternoon, just before the clerk's office closed. He requested Harry to inform him of the case number, assuring that he would handle the rest. Nick reminded Harry that he didn't practice criminal law well and wouldn't be able to assist if Nick encountered legal trouble. "You'll be pleasantly surprised," Nick declared as he exited. His next destination was a meeting with Sam Granger, proving highly productive. Nick discovered they could sell the house for over $100 of the mortgage, without a real estate agent's commission. Linda would be delighted. Nick pledged to have the necessary paperwork ready for a swift deal closure. Exiting Sam's office, Nick checked his phone. No messages or calls. She must still be enjoying time with Dwayne. Nick took the chance to urgently request 2 weeks of vacation, or he would quit, leaving his boss, Sven, in a panic. Luckily, Sven granted the request, given a temporary lull in business. With the groundwork laid, Nick returned to the hotel to focus on the real work. By Monday evening, he was prepared. Throughout Sunday night and Monday, Linda left unanswered voicemails. Nick conserved his energy for Tuesday morning. Thanks to Frank's front-facing camera, Nick knew Dwayne spent Monday night there, likely leaving for work around 8 a.m. Linda would depart around 8:30 a.m. So, at 7 a.m., Nick walked in yelling, "Honey, I'm home." Upon hearing brisk footsteps upstairs, Nick observed Linda, who appeared disheveled and shocked as she descended in her robe. Linda greeted him with attempted cheerfulness, expressing surprise and panic. Nick, maintaining a cheerful tone, apologized for not returning her calls, attributing it to the demands of being on the road. Disregarding the wine glasses, he headed to the dining room, and Linda, unsure of how to prevent him from reaching Dwayne, stood in the doorway. A knock on the door caught Linda off guard, and Nick asked her to answer it. As he spread papers on the table, Linda opened the door, expecting a bailiff with divorce papers. Instead, Maggie entered and greeted with a simple, "Hi." Linda watched curiously as Maggie unpacked her briefcase at the dining table. Nick, feigning sincerity, apologized to Linda, expressing the need for a renewed power of attorney due to potential financial or medical issues during their travels. He also mentioned an offer to refinance his mortgage and apologized for the short notice. Linda, after some initial tension, inquired about Maggie. Nick introduced her as Maggie, and Linda visibly relaxed. Despite having a lover hidden upstairs, she felt events weren't entirely out of control. With a smirk, Linda referred to Nick as her Boy Scout, emphasizing his readiness and claiming it was just the way she was, though her eyes remained wary. Handing Linda a pen, Nick began rearranging papers in front of her, explaining that the check marks with arrows indicated where she needed to sign. Linda, expressing trust, responded with a wide smile and promptly signed all the papers in front of her. He hoped that was the case because otherwise he wasn't going to get anywhere. But he who dares wins, as they say. While Linda signed each document, Nick organized them and handed them to Maggie, who lined them up and notarized them. "Mrs. Buford, do you have a photo ID?" asked Maggie. Linda got up from the table to find her purse. Maggie and Nick exchanged glances, but both had to quickly lower their eyes to the table to keep from laughing. Linda brought her driver's license to the table. Maggie took a picture of it with her phone and wrote the information in her notary journal. Linda offered coffee, but both Nick and Maggie declined. While Maggie recorded the notarized documents in her journal, and Nick sorted everything into different folders, Linda looked up, expecting Nick to attempt something and calculating her next move. Maggie left, stowing away all the tools, and smiled at Nick when Linda wasn't looking. Nick gave Linda a break, stating that he needed to have a teleconference and would go down to his basement office to do so. Linda's shoulders relaxed. For now, she would have time to escort Dwayne out the door and erase any trace of his presence before Nick reappeared from his man cave. Nick went downstairs to give her the illusion that she was still fooling him. He pretended not to hear Dwayne's heavy footsteps descending the stairs, or the sound of the garage door opening, so Dwayne's car could pull out. But upon hearing the sound of the shower running in the master bath, Nick gathered everything he had, walked out the basement door, and left in his car without a word to his loving wife. 2 hours later, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, Nick was in Harry's office. Harry appeared shocked as Nick explained that he had managed to get the wife to sign a form, CC 1406, agreeing to the service of the divorce petition on her and waiving service of court notices and notices of any future proceedings. Harry examined the properly notarized form that Nick presented, and Nick confirmed that it was indeed signed. Harry sought clarification, asking if Nick had also persuaded his wife, an experienced attorney, to sign a property division agreement. This agreement included provisions such as giving Nick all the proceeds from the sale of their house and its contents, the cars, and Linda's jewelry. Additionally, it granted Nick full discretion over the disposition of Linda's personal belongings and allowed both of them to walk away with their respective retirement accounts, with no alimony in Linda's favor. Nick affirmed these details, emphasizing that Linda, who earned more money than him, willingly agreed to leave the marriage with approximately $125,000 in retirement contributions and about $200,000 in undergraduate and law school debt, according to the documents. Harry, seemingly skeptical, remarked that Linda had a generous nature. Harry then turned his attention to the affidavit Nick claimed Linda signed, admitting to cheating and acknowledging the presence of her lover in the marital bedroom at the time of signing. Nick confirmed these details and referenced an email correspondence where Linda discussed staying with her lover because he aroused her. Nick, showing no visible emotion, asserted that the documents spoke for themselves. Harry glanced at the papers, looked up at Nick, and started to smile but suppressed it, twisting in his chair. He expressed frustration, mentioning his intention to file all the presented documents. Harry, feeling embarrassed, acknowledged Nick as a respected member of the bar and a friend from law school. He admitted being unaware that Nick was fabricating the situation and stated that everything appeared fine to him. Harry, addressing the court, suggested disbarment for Nick, emphasizing the violation of trust by his client. Nick, understanding the situation, inquired about the notary's potential role as a witness if needed. Harry confirmed that the notary could testify that Linda signed the documents and might mention seeing her scrutinize them. However, Harry refrained from providing an opinion on Linda's understanding of the document contents. Nick agreed to the plan, and Harry mentioned that he would file all the documents, including Frank's affidavit and report, which contained attached photos and a DVD. Harry intended to keep it out of the electronic file temporarily to prevent it from making the news. Nick emphasized the importance of keeping things quiet, considering Linda's impending departure for Paris in a little over 2 weeks. He asked if Harry knew anyone at the county courthouse. Harry mentioned Seth, a day student from the year after them, currently clerking at the county courthouse to build up his resume. Harry believed Seth might be able to expedite the process, but he cautioned that if the judge wanted live testimony, the entire plan could collapse, and Linda would need to make a decision. Nick informed Harry that Linda did not want to contest the case on fraud once she understood the situation. He mentioned that if things took a negative turn at that stage, he might have to let go of Harry's services, to which Harry agreed. Nick expressed a desire to hear the full story someday, but conveyed his reluctance to discuss it at the moment. Over the next 2 weeks, Nick successfully maintained a distance from Linda. He sent her text messages at off hours, letting her know how busy he was, but he answered her calls the rest of the time. Over time, she began to call less frequently. "You scared the hell out of her," Frank told him at the end of the week. "Judging from the videotape, Dwayne hasn't been in the house once since you showed up and surprised them Tuesday morning. I can't tell if they're meeting at his place during the week or having fun with each other at the office, but they're not doing it in the house. I'll tell you if anything changes." The only thing that had changed was that Nick had quietly returned to the house when he found out Linda was gone and had taken the financial papers he thought he might need. He also signed a contract to sell the house to Sam Granger. The transaction was to take place during Linda's first week in France. The rest of the time, Nick went to the gym, did some leisure reading, and pondered how he had gotten to the point where he was 30 years old with his life in such disarray. He told Sven that he needed a few more weeks off, and Sven reluctantly agreed. "She's having fun with him at the house again," Frank said Saturday, a week before Linda was scheduled to leave for Paris. "Thanks for the heads up," Nick replied. He didn't care, but he knew that once he got rid of the house, he'd rather burn the sheets than sell them. By this time, Nick had watched the video that Frank had given him the first time he realized his attraction. Dwayne was a couple of years younger, and as Frank's investigation had revealed, the guy was a gym rat, constantly pulling himself up in front of the mirror after weight training. Otherwise, he was unremarkable in comparison. Nick was in reasonable shape, but didn't boast a tight belly. Linda seemed to be seeking arm candy, a trait Nick could do without. Before he knew it, Linda embarked on her eagerly anticipated trip to Paris. A member of Frank's team followed her to the airport, ensuring her departure to Europe. Upon receiving the news, Nick went to the house, piled all of Linda's clothes in the living room, and packed up his belongings. The next day, movers arrived, packing Linda's items separately and sending them to storage. They also packed Nick's things and moved them to the apartment he found with Sam Granger's help. Nick easily sold the furniture thanks to Sam's reselling skills. Once the house was empty, Nick did a final walkthrough before taking one last action. He carefully collected wedding photos, the album, and Linda's wedding dress. He brought them to the fire pit under the treehouse on the patio, placed them atop embers, added lighter fluid to the dress, and lit a match. As everything burned, Nick was pleased with the level of detail captured in the video, even discerning details in each photo as it joined the flames. A day later, Nick closed the sale of the marital home, using Linda's power of attorney to sign on her behalf, a move she should have scrutinized. With a separate financial power of attorney, Nick deposited the house sale profit into his personal account, certifying it on behalf of his wife as her attorney in fact, and closed the joint accounts 3 days later. Still, in the initial week of Linda's French trip, a construction crew razed the house. Days later, they cleared the debris, starting preparations for the site. Unfortunately, the tree with the treehouse had to be removed for a planned gazebo. However, construction halted once only an empty square of land remained, due to issues in the permitting process. Nick and his law school friend at the county permit office believed the problem would resolve upon Linda's return, with proper forms submitted and approved. Throughout this period, Nick ignored all of Linda's attempts to contact him, not responding to calls, emails, or voicemails. El Diablo, using the landline, informed Nick that Linda and Dwayne appeared stressed and didn't look their best, suspecting something was amiss. Nick asked how El Diablo knew, to which he simply claimed to have connections everywhere, even in Europe. El Diablo inquired if Nick wanted Linda's wedding and engagement rings, and upon Nick's refusal, asked if someone else could acquire them. Nick agreed. 2 days before Linda's return from Paris, Nick visited Harry's office, receiving an unexpectedly swift divorce decree. Seth, tight-lipped, facilitated the process, and Nick opted not to inquire further, congratulating himself on his newfound single status. Harry provided a copy to send to Nick's ex-wife, expecting her delight. As Nick was getting into his car outside Harry's office, his phone rang. Receiving a call from an unfamiliar number, Nick recognized El Diablo's voice as soon as he answered. El Diablo advised Nick to take a vacation immediately, suggesting he go to a place with a lot of people who know him and can confirm his presence. El Diablo ended the call abruptly. Nick, understanding the urgency, realized he hadn't seen his college friends in New York for a while. Luckily, they had free schedules in the next few days. That afternoon, he hopped on Amtrak, attended shows, explored museums, and shared meals with friends, most of which he paid for with a credit card. Nick also tipped generously at the hotel to ensure the staff knew who he was. During his stay, he express-mailed a DVD copy of him burning Linda's wedding dress and album to Linda's parents' home. Late one Sunday night, while savoring coffee and cake at Little Italy in Manhattan, Nick received a call from his father-in-law. His father-in-law informed him that Linda was in the hospital and going through a difficult time. Nick inquired about the reason behind her condition. His father-in-law explained that Linda had returned from a business trip on Friday and, along with a colleague, had been kidnapped at the airport. They were medicated and only managed to escape that morning. Unfortunately, Linda's colleague had been severely smacking. Nick could sense the emotional strain in his father-in-law's voice. Once upon a time, Nick might have felt sympathy. However, he asked about Linda's condition. The father-in-law explained that when Linda woke up, she found herself covered in tattoos with derogatory inscriptions, labeling her as a fancy woman and a strumpet. Soon after awakening and realizing this, an individual wearing a mask entered and physically assaulted her, breaking her nose and causing 2 black eyes. Nick couldn't help but be impressed by the severity of the situation. Really, it was the cherry on top of the ice cream. He would have been happy if Linda had realized that he had betrayed her in court, just as she had betrayed him in marriage. But this was just a rainbow pleasure of joy. It would be worth an immortal soul if he could give it away. Expressing his condolences, Nick acknowledged that he was currently out of town and inquired about what his father-in-law would like him to do. Detecting surprise on the other end, his father-in-law emphasized that Linda was Nick's wife. Nick, without much emotion, clarified that they were divorced, and the order was issued the previous week due to Linda's infidelity with the man she was traveling with. When his father-in-law seemed confused, Nick coldly mentioned having a video of the infidelity and offered to send a copy. The revelation left his father-in-law in stunned silence. Nick, displaying a lack of empathy, stated that Linda was no longer his problem, and his father-in-law would need to take care of her. His father-in-law, expressing frustration, accused Nick of causing the situation. Nick, unapologetic, explained that he had been in New York celebrating his divorce since Wednesday. He acknowledged the father-in-law's upset state and hoped for Linda's recovery, but conveyed that they had nothing more to discuss. Nick then ended the call. It occurred to Nick at that moment that the stress of city life had been too much lately. He sent Sven an email saying that Sven and the firm could go to hell, respectfully, after all. A quick internet search revealed that there was an REI store in Soho, and Nick got himself some new hiking and camping gear. Linda had never liked camping, so this was a chance to reconnect with her. Scouting past the hotel was very accommodating, and agreed to leave his luggage for a while for a reasonable fee, and Nick was on his way to the Adirondack Mountains to commune with nature until things calmed down. Luckily, he had his passport with him in case he had time to travel to Canada, and it turned out he did have time. For the next 8 weeks, he kept his phone turned off. Initially, he assumed some disturbed woman had taken possession of his ex-wife's phone, given the multitude of messages, including frantic screams and cries. He listened to just a couple and deleted the rest. There were numerous crazy emails, too. Her account must have been hacked. Reading through all of this seemed impossible. He hoped the troubled woman responsible would find the help she desperately needed. After 8 weeks, Nick, Frank, and Harry gathered for a drink. Harry clarified that he had terminated their ties with the attorney right after serving Nick the divorce decree, a piece of information Nick admitted to not having checked yet. As they settled at the table, Frank described the aftermath as a serious situation, likening it to a typhoon of destruction. Harry, with a sense of dark humor, found amusement in the widespread chaos. Frank began recounting the events, detailing how Linda, accompanied by her parents, had a meltdown upon seeing the vacant lot where their house once stood. Her emotional breakdown escalated as construction workers arrived, and her tattooed face became a source of laughter among them. Despite her visible injuries and the duct tape on her broken nose, the offensive tattoos on her face, neck, and arms were prominent. Harry took over the narrative, indicating that the work on her face was particularly well done, making the text highly visible on camera. The derogatory phrases included fancy woman, puta, and explicit statements about her preferences. In the afternoon, Linda, along with a couple of lawyers from prominent firms, arrived at Frank's office without an appointment. Frank deliberately made them wait for 15 minutes, ensuring that his loaded Glock was in his desk for safety. Grateful for Virginia's firearm laws, Frank eventually faced their anger, enduring discussions about emergency motions, bar complaints, and contempt proceedings. Despite the tension, Frank couldn't help but be aware of the visible ink on his face, done in red and blue for maximum visibility. When he finally shifted his attention, Frank questioned the nature of their problem and challenged them to identify any false statements in the documents. The lawyers hesitated and looked at each other. Frank then asked if the dispute revolved around Linda's infidelity, to which they all affirmed. Taking control of the situation, Frank played the videotape that had been recording while they waited. The footage clearly showed Linda engaging in lovemaking activities with someone other than her husband in the marital bed. The lawyers, caught off guard and seemingly unfamiliar with the case details, exchanged confused glances. Linda began shouting about not having a chance to explain, claiming that she never agreed to let Nick sell the house and accused him of burning her personal belongings, including her wedding dress, pictures, and album. Frank presented copies of powers of attorney, including one for the house sale, and the property settlement agreement, which granted Nick authority over her personal items. He pointed out that Linda was fortunate to still have her clothes. When Frank questioned if she contested her signature on the documents, Linda admitted to it, but insisted she hadn't agreed to the contents. Frank pressed further, asking if her defense rested on not reading what she signed, and warned her about the potential consequences during cross-examination in court. Linda fell silent, and when Frank referred to the accurate affidavit she signed, admitting her lover's presence during the signing, she lost consciousness. Despite attempts to revive her, she refused to go to the hospital. Later, she complained about tattoos and her boyfriend being assaulted, to which Frank clarified that Nick was out of town and likely had no involvement. Dwayne's altercation may have been with another angered party, thinking Linda was defending him. Frank directed them to the Fairfax Police Department for criminal matters. The drama continued as they discussed filing a motion for reconsideration. Frank received an anonymous email with links to videotapes of Linda and Dwayne in Nick's bed during their escapades in front of Paris, warning of widespread distribution if she persisted. Frank informed Nick about this, stating that these were friends Nick had assisted and who pledged to protect him by activating the send button if Linda persisted. Following their departure, Frank heard nothing more from them. Nothing happened at the courthouse, and Frank suggested that they might have involved the police, who initially sought copies of the videotape and report, but lost interest later. Linda and Dwayne couldn't explain the events, remembering only entering a cab at the airport, with the next memory being in the hospital. Linda woke up in a shabby hotel, endured a punch to the face, and found her way to the hospital, discovering that room charges, room service, and minibar expenses were billed to her credit card. This time, Nick disclosed that the hotel manager, along with New York police officers, had verified his stay, contacting his New York friends who affirmed his active schedule in the city. Harry shared street talk that suggested Nick's ex was hiding in her parents' basement, undergoing an expensive laser tattoo removal due to her extensive coverage. Nick expressed regret, prompting a glance from Harry and a restrained chuckle from Frank. Regarding Meat Eater, Harry reported he suffered severe injuries, anticipating substantial future physical therapy with head damage and difficulty securing another paralegal job. Both were let go by their firm due to relationship breakdown during the trip, adversely affecting the arbitration with missed details, unprepared exhibits, and issues with lost witness notes. The client expressed dissatisfaction, leading the firm to make sacrifices to retain the client for future work. Frank praised Nick, hinting at a future revelation of how he accomplished it. Nick innocently asked, "Managed what? I'm a Boy Scout." Maggie, waiting in the car, expressed her willingness to vouch for watching Linda review each document before signing, but couldn't estimate the time spent. Nick suggested discussing over dinner and treating Maggie for helping him gain his freedom. Maggie clarified, dispelling the notion of a boyfriend, prompting Nick's surprised reaction. She directed him to take her home, ready for a lengthy apology. Nick agreed with a smile, but mentioned a quick stop at the post office to send a card to a friend, featuring a Boy Scout emblem, asking if she felt safe at the moment.